The city was nothing but ruins now. Buildings once filled with life were reduced to skeletal remains, their shattered frames jutting into the dark sky like the broken ribs of a dead beast. Fires still burned in the distance, their smoke twisting into the cold air. The ground was littered with bodies, human, alien, and machine, silent witnesses to the war that had ravaged Seraphis Prime. Ethan Carter moved cautiously through the wreckage, his rifle held tight, scanning for movement. The battle had ended hours ago, but the Dominion's hunter drones still patrolled the streets, executing any survivors. He was only here for supplies, food, ammo, anything that could keep him going for another day. He had learned the hard way that lingering too long in one place was a death sentence. Then he saw her. At first, she looked like just another body in the pile. But as he drew closer, the faint bioluminescent glow of her blood caught his eye. A soft blue light spreading from a deep gash in her side. His breath caught as recognition hit him. This wasn't just any soldier. This was her. Princess Althera, the half-human, half-alien heir to the Dominion. She was supposed to be dead. The Dominion had declared her a traitor, an abomination. Even the human resistance had abandoned her, seeing her as an unwanted hybrid, neither fully human nor fully one of them. And yet here she was, barely clinging to life, left to die in the ruins of her own home. Ethan clenched his jaw. She wasn't his problem. He should just move on. A hunter drone whirred overhead, scanning the battlefield for any survivors. Its red eye locked onto her body. A mechanical voice echoed through the cold air. Target identified. Discarded entity. Executing purge protocol. The drone's plasma weapon powered up. Ethan acted before he could think. A single shot rang out, shattering the drone's sensor module. Sparks erupted as it spun wildly, crashing into the rubble. The sound would bring more of them soon. Cursing under his breath, Ethan slung his rifle over his shoulder, crouched down, and lifted Althera into his arms. She was lighter than he expected, her body weak from blood loss. Her skin was cold. He had no idea if she would survive, but leaving her here wasn't an option anymore. The moment he turned to move, he heard them. Mechanized footsteps. The Dominion had already sent reinforcements. Ethan sprinted through the ruined streets, his cloak device flickering as it struggled to keep up with his rapid movement. Plasma bolts rained down around him, scorching the ground, lighting up the darkness with bursts of deadly blue fire. He ducked behind a collapsed structure, his breathing ragged. The Dominion's war mechs were relentless, their scanners cutting through the smoke. He had to lose them. Fast. Activating his cloaking device, he pressed his back against the cold stone, waiting as the machines searched the area. A single mistake, a single sound, and it would be over. Althera stirred in his arms, a weak groan escaping her lips. The sound was barely audible, but it was enough. A drone turned its head. Survivor detected. Damn it. Ethan bolted. Ducking and weaving through the wreckage, he fired blindly behind him, his pulse rifle sending streaks of energy toward his pursuers. One shot connected, sending a drone spiraling out of the air, but the mechs weren't stopping. A collapsed tunnel entrance loomed ahead. It was risky, but he had no choice. Ethan dove forward, sliding through the rubble just as the mechs opened fire. Plasma scorched the edges of the tunnel, but he was already gone, swallowed by the darkness. The Dominion would keep searching, but for now, he had bought them time. Inside the ruined bunker, Ethan set Althera down, his hands shaking. He pulled a med kit from his pack and went to work, sealing her wounds as best he could. Her breathing was shallow, but steady. Her eyes flickered open. For a long moment, she just stared at him, her violet gaze filled with confusion. And something else. Wariness. "You're human," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Ethan smirked. "Last time I checked." She tried to sit up, but pain shot through her body. She hissed, falling back against the cold ground. "Why? Why did you save me?" "Seemed like a waste to let the Dominion finish the job," Ethan muttered, checking the seals on her wounds. Besides, they tried to kill me too. Guess that makes us both disposable. Her expression hardened. They fear me. I am proof that humans and the Dominion are not so different. If my existence is allowed, their rule weakens. Ethan raised an eyebrow. So, they want you dead. Welcome to the club. She studied him for a long moment. And what about you? Why are you still here? Ethan exhaled, leaning back against the bunker wall. Because I know what it's like to be abandoned. Outside, the Dominion scanners hummed through the air, still searching for them. It wouldn't be long before they had to move again. Althera closed her eyes, her strength failing. They won't stop hunting me. Ethan checked his rifle, then looked at her with a smirk. Then we make them regret it. The next few hours were a blur of planning and survival. Ethan scouted the area, setting traps where he could. Improvised explosives, hack drones, anything to slow down their pursuers. They were outnumbered and outgunned, but if they were going down, they weren't going down easy. When the Dominion found them, the battle was brutal. Close quarters combat in the ruins of the city. Shotgun blasts, plasma blades clashing in the dark. Ethan fought with everything he had, covering Althera as she used what little strength remained to hack into a nearby Dominion signal relay. The plan was insane, but if she could send a distress call, if the resistance was still out there, maybe, just maybe, they had a chance. The Dominion mechs closed in. Ethan's rifle ran dry. A war drone locked onto him. Then, a thunderous explosion shook the ground. Resistance ships. They had received the signal. The Dominion forces turned, but it was too late. Fighters swooped in, raining down fire from above, ripping through the machines like paper. As the battle ended, Ethan turned to Althera. She was watching the sky, her violet eyes filled with something he hadn't seen before. Hope. She looked at him, her voice steady despite her injuries. You didn't just save me, Ethan. You saved what I stand for. Ethan smirked. Yeah, well, let's just make sure it wasn't for nothing. As the resistance fighters approached, weapons ready, Althera stepped forward. She wasn't just a discarded princess anymore. She was a survivor, a fighter, a leader. And this war wasn't over yet. Ethan adjusted his grip on Althera as he moved through the ruins, his breath coming in short, controlled bursts. She was barely conscious, her body limp in his arms. He could feel the warmth of her bioluminescent blood soaking into his sleeve, but there was no time to stop. The Dominion was already hunting them. Somewhere behind him, the mechanical hum of hunter drones echoed through the shattered streets. The Dominion never left unfinished business. If they had marked someone for death, they would not stop until the job was done. Ethan had seen it before. Whole settlements wiped out because a single survivor had been left behind. These machines did not make mistakes. He ducked into the hollowed-out remains of a collapsed building, pressing his back against the cold metal wall. His pulse pounded in his ears. He needed to think. Fast. The streets were too open, too exposed. The drones would spot them within seconds if they tried to move in the open. He needed cover. He needed a way out. Althera stirred slightly in his arms, her eyelids fluttering as she tried to focus. Where? Her voice was weak, barely more than a whisper. Quiet, Ethan muttered. He risked a quick glance around the corner. 2 hunter drones hovered just above the ground, scanning the wreckage with their glowing red optics. A third, larger than the others, walked on spindly mechanical legs, its sleek black plating shifting as it processed its surroundings. Ethan's grip tightened on his rifle. The moment he made a move, they would detect him. Even cloaking wouldn't help for long. These things were designed to track heat signatures, movement, even heartbeat patterns. Hiding was only delaying the inevitable. A soft beep sounded from his wrist device. His cloaking field was almost out of power. He clenched his teeth. He had to move. Shifting Althera's weight, he crouched low and slipped through the shadows, weaving between fallen beams and crumbling walls. Every step was measured, every breath controlled. The drones whirred overhead, scanning, searching. One wrong move, one misplaced step, and it would all be over. A sharp metallic click echoed through the ruins. The sound of a weapon priming. Ethan's stomach clenched. He barely had time to react before a flash of blue light streaked past him, scorching the wall inches from his face. The drones had found him. Swearing under his breath, Ethan bolted. He ducked under broken scaffolding, sprinting through the wreckage as plasma bolts rained down around him. The Dominion had locked onto his position, and now they were closing in. Althera groaned, her head rolling against his shoulder. "Put me down," she whispered. "Not a chance," Ethan shot back, leaping over a pile of debris. A blast struck the ground behind him, sending shards of stone and metal flying. The ruined city blurred around him as he ran, his body moving on instinct. He knew these streets, knew every collapsed tunnel and every shattered building. The Dominion might have turned this place into a graveyard, but he had spent enough time scavenging through its bones to know where to disappear. A narrow alley loomed ahead, barely wide enough for a single person to slip through. It was a risk. If the drones followed him in, there would be no room to maneuver, but he was out of options. Gritting his teeth, he dove into the alleyway, pressing his back against the cracked wall. The drones hesitated for a moment, their scanning beams sweeping the entrance. The space was too small for them to fly through. They couldn't get a clear shot. Ethan didn't wait for them to figure out another plan. He pressed a button on his wrist device, activating the last of his cloaking charge. His body flickered out of sight, the energy field wrapping around him like a second skin. The drones hovered in place, their sensors clicking as they searched for a target. The seconds stretched, each one heavier than the last. Ethan didn't breathe, didn't move. Then, finally, the drones turned away, retreating back into the ruins. Ethan exhaled slowly, his muscles unclenching. The cloak had bought them a few seconds, but it wouldn't last forever. He had to keep moving. He adjusted his grip on Althera and pressed forward, slipping deeper into the ruined tunnels beneath the city. The air was thick with dust, the only light coming from the soft glow of emergency panels embedded in the walls. These tunnels had once been part of the city's underground transit system, but now they were nothing more than abandoned relics of a lost civilization. Althera stirred again, her fingers weakly grasping at his sleeve. "You should have left me," she murmured. Ethan glanced down at her, his expression unreadable. "Not my style." Her lips parted slightly, as if she wanted to argue, but exhaustion took over. Her eyes fluttered shut again, her breathing shallow but steady. Ethan pressed on. The Dominion wouldn't stop hunting them. The only way to survive was to keep moving, to stay ahead of the machines that wanted them dead. He didn't know why he was risking his life for her. Maybe it was because she reminded him of the people he had lost, the squad mates who had fought and died against the Dominion's war machines. Maybe it was because she was proof that the Dominion wasn't invincible, that something new could be born from the ashes of this war. Or maybe he was just tired of watching good people die. Whatever the reason, he wasn't turning back now. Ethan moved carefully through the underground tunnels, his boots barely making a sound on the cracked concrete floor. The air was damp, filled with the scent of rust and decay. These tunnels had been abandoned for years, but they were still safer than the streets above. Up there, the Dominion's machines were still hunting. Down here, at least for now, they were hidden. Althera was growing weaker. He could feel it. She was barely conscious, her breathing shallow. The wound in her side was sealed, but she had lost too much blood. Ethan didn't know much about Dominion physiology, but he knew that if he didn't find proper medical supplies soon, she wasn't going to make it. He found an old maintenance room and carefully lowered her onto the floor, using his jacket to cushion her head. She groaned softly, her violet eyes flickering open for a moment before slipping shut again. Ethan knelt beside her, checking the crude bandages he had wrapped around her wounds. The bioluminescent glow of her blood had faded slightly, but she was still dangerously weak. He frowned. He needed answers. "Who did this to you?" he asked, his voice low. Althera didn't respond at first. For a long moment, she just lay there, her face pale, her body motionless. Then, slowly, she turned her head toward him. "My own people," she whispered. Ethan stiffened. He had expected as much, but hearing her say it confirmed his worst suspicions. The Dominion didn't just want her dead. They had left her to die. "Why?" he pressed. Althera's gaze flickered with something: pain, exhaustion, maybe even regret. "Because I am not like them," she murmured. Ethan sat back, his jaw tightening. He had heard the stories. Althera was the product of an impossible union, a child born of both human and Dominion blood, a symbol of something neither side wanted to acknowledge. The Dominion saw her as a disgrace, a stain on their genetic purity. And humans, well, humans didn't trust her either. She was a reminder of the war, a living, breathing embodiment of everything they had fought against. "You don't belong anywhere," Ethan said quietly. Althera's lips twitched in something that might have been a smile, but it faded almost instantly. "No," she admitted. "I don't." Ethan ran a hand through his hair. He wasn't sure why he cared. He barely knew her. She was just another survivor in a galaxy filled with war and death. But something about her story, about her, kept him from walking away. Maybe it was because he knew what it felt like to be abandoned. Maybe it was because he was tired of watching the Dominion decide who lived and who died. Or maybe he was just tired of being alone. He sighed. "What do they want from you?" Althera hesitated, her fingers curling weakly against the fabric of his jacket. "They're afraid," she whispered. "Afraid that I might prove them wrong." Ethan frowned. "Wrong about what?" She exhaled softly. "About everything." For a long moment, there was silence. The only sound was the distant hum of machinery, the slow drip of water from the cracked ceiling. Ethan watched her carefully, waiting for her to say more. When she finally spoke again, her voice was barely audible. "The Dominion believes in control, in order, in genetic perfection. They think that anything that does not fit into their vision of strength must be erased." Her gaze met his, and for the first time, he saw something behind the exhaustion: determination. "But I exist, and because I exist, their entire system is flawed." Ethan let out a low whistle. "So you're proof that their so-called perfection is just a lie?" Althera nodded weakly. "And that terrifies them." Ethan exhaled sharply, leaning back against the wall. It made sense. The Dominion ruled through fear and absolute authority. Anything that challenged their ideals was seen as a threat. And Althera, she wasn't just a threat. She was living, breathing evidence that they were wrong. No wonder they wanted her dead. Ethan shook his head. "So they tried to kill you?" Althera's expression darkened. "No," she said softly. "They did worse." Ethan frowned, waiting for her to continue. "They didn't just want me dead," she murmured. "They wanted me erased, forgotten, like I never existed at all." Ethan felt a chill run down his spine. He had seen the Dominion's brutality firsthand. They didn't just kill their enemies. They wiped them from history. Entire civilizations had been erased under their rule, their names lost, their cultures destroyed. If they wanted Althera gone, they wouldn't stop until there was no trace of her left. "Why not just execute you?" Ethan asked. Althera's fingers tightened slightly. "Because they wanted me to suffer first." Ethan clenched his jaw. He had seen too much of the Dominion's cruelty to be surprised, but something about this felt personal. They hadn't just abandoned her. They had made an example of her. "Then they messed up," he said finally. "Because you're still here." Althera gave him a tired look. "For now." Ethan shook his head. "No, you're not dying down here. Not today." She let out a soft breath, her expression unreadable. "You're different," she murmured. Ethan raised an eyebrow. "How so?" Althera hesitated, then closed her eyes. Because you actually care. Ethan wasn't sure what to say to that. He wasn't even sure if it was true. But as he sat there, listening to the distant echoes of the Dominion's machines searching above, he made a decision. He didn't know why he had saved her. Maybe it was instinct. Maybe it was stupidity. But now that he wasn't going to let the Dominion finish what they had started. They had left her to die. Now, they were going to regret it. Ethan tightened his grip on his rifle as he moved through the narrow tunnels, his eyes scanning the darkness ahead. Every step was cautious, every breath controlled. He could hear the distant hum of Dominion drones above, their mechanical sensors sweeping the ruins for any sign of movement. They were hunting. And if they found him and Althera, there would be no escape. Althera was barely holding on. Her breathing was slow, her skin pale, her body limp in his arms. He had tried to stop the bleeding, had patched her wounds as best as he could, but she needed real medical attention, and he had none to give. The tunnel walls around them were cracked and covered in old battle scars, remnants of a war long lost. This place had once been a refuge, a hidden sanctuary beneath the city. Now it was nothing more than a tomb. Ethan didn't want to think about how many had died here. He had seen enough death already. He paused at a junction, pressing his back against the cold wall. A faint red light flickered ahead. Motion sensors. The Dominion had been here. That meant traps, scanners, and possibly worse. He clenched his jaw. They weren't just hunting. They were waiting. Althera stirred slightly in his arms, her voice barely above a whisper. They're close. Ethan nodded. He had known that for a while now. The problem wasn't just the Dominion. It was the fact that they were running out of places to hide. A distant metallic screech echoed through the tunnels. Ethan's grip on his rifle tightened. That wasn't a drone. It was something else. Something worse. Althera's fingers curled weakly around his sleeve. It's a Reaper. Ethan exhaled sharply. You've got to be kidding me. The Reapers were the Dominion's deadliest hunters, biomechanical assassins, built for one purpose: to track and eliminate anything marked as a target. Unlike standard drones, Reapers didn't just rely on scanners and heat signatures. They could smell fear, hear the slightest heartbeat, sense movement even in complete darkness. And worst of all, they didn't stop. Ever. Ethan's mind raced. He had faced Reapers before, and he knew the truth. You didn't fight them. You ran. He shifted Althera's weight and moved faster, sticking close to the tunnel walls. The faint glow of emergency lights flickered above them, casting long, shifting shadows. Every step felt heavier, every sound amplified. He needed a plan. Then a sound. A soft, rhythmic clicking. Ethan froze. The hairs on the back of his neck stood up. The clicking grew louder, closer. He turned his head, slowly, carefully. And then he saw it. A shape moved in the darkness, its body blending seamlessly with the shadows. It was tall, too tall, its limbs unnaturally thin, its movements eerily smooth. Its face was hidden behind a sleek, metallic mask, glowing red slits where its eyes should have been. The Reaper. Ethan's pulse pounded. It had found them. He barely had time to react before the thing moved. It didn't walk. It glided, its body shifting with unnatural speed, closing the distance between them in seconds. Ethan turned, gripping Althera tightly, and ran. The tunnel walls blurred past him as he sprinted through the darkness. Behind him, the Reaper followed, silent and relentless. It didn't make a sound. It didn't need to. It was faster, stronger, and it was gaining. Althera groaned weakly, her fingers digging into his arm. You can't outrun it. Ethan gritted his teeth. Watch me. He rounded a corner, nearly slipping on the damp floor, and spotted an old rusted ladder leading up. An exit. He didn't hesitate. Shifting Althera onto his shoulder, he leaped for the ladder and climbed. The Reaper was close, too close. He could feel its presence behind him. hear the soft whisper of its movements. Then, a sharp pain. A cold, burning sensation sliced through his side. The Reaper's blade. Ethan grunted but didn't stop. He reached the top of the ladder and threw himself forward, landing on hard metal. A hatch. His way out. He slammed his palm against the control panel. The hatch groaned, then hissed as it began to open. Light spilled into the tunnel, the first real light he had seen in what felt like hours. But the Reaper was right behind him. Ethan turned, raising his rifle, but it was too late. The Reaper lunged. A blur of movement. A flash of red light. Then, a gunshot. The Reaper staggered back, a small explosion of sparks bursting from its chest. Another shot followed, then another. The Reaper twitched violently, its body jerking as bullets tore through its sleek black armor. Ethan didn't waste a second. He grabbed Althera and pulled her through the hatch just as the Reaper collapsed, its glowing red eyes flickering. He slammed his fist against the control panel again. The hatch slammed shut. Silence. Ethan collapsed onto his back, his chest rising and falling rapidly. His side was burning, but he ignored it. They were alive. Barely. Althera stirred beside him, her violet eyes fluttering open. Did we? Ethan let out a breathless chuckle. Yeah, we made it. For now Ethan's breath was heavy as he pushed forward, his boots kicking up dust and debris with every step. His side burned from the Reaper's blade, but he ignored the pain. They didn't have time to rest. The Dominion would know they had escaped, and that meant they would send everything to hunt them down. Althera was weak but conscious. Her violet eyes flickered open as he set her down against a rusted console inside the ruined control tower they had found. The place was barely standing. Cracked walls, shattered glass, and old Dominion banners torn and faded with time. But for now, it was shelter. We can't keep running, she murmured, her voice hoarse. Ethan exhaled, leaning against the wall as he checked his rifle. Half a clip left. Not enough. I know, he admitted. Althera looked up at him, her gaze steady despite the exhaustion. Then we fight. Ethan smirked, shaking his head. You're half dead, princess. Fighting isn't exactly an option. She struggled to sit up, her expression hardening. It is the only option. Ethan studied her for a moment. There was something in her eyes, something fierce. She wasn't just trying to survive anymore. She wanted to end this. He sighed, rubbing a hand over his face. All right. Say we make a stand. How exactly do we win? Althera took a shaky breath. We don't need to defeat the Dominion's entire army. We just need to send a message. Ethan frowned. What kind of message? She turned her head toward the shattered window, her gaze fixed on the dark sky. The Dominion thrives on fear and control. They erase anything that threatens their rule. She looked back at him. They tried to erase me. But if the galaxy knows I'm alive, if they see that the Dominion failed, their hold on power will start to crumble. Ethan considered her words. It was risky, maybe even insane, but she was right. The Dominion wasn't just strong because of their weapons or technology. They were strong because everyone believed they were unstoppable. If that belief was broken, if the people saw that the Dominion could lose, everything would change. He nodded slowly. All right, let's make some noise. Althera gave a small, determined smile. There's a communications array on the other side of the base. If we can activate it, we can broadcast a message to the outer colonies. Ethan sighed. Of course it's on the other side of the base. Before she could respond, a distant rumble shook the ground beneath them. Ethan's body tensed. He knew that sound. Dropships. The Dominion had arrived. Althera struggled to her feet, gripping the edge of the console for support. Ethan steadied her with one arm, his other hand tightening around his rifle. They're not wasting any time, he muttered. Althera's expression was grim, because they know what's at stake. Ethan peered through the shattered window. The sky was filled with Dominion warships, their sleek black forms blotting out the stars. Dropships descended in waves, their engines roaring as they deployed heavily armed soldiers. Ethan's jaw tightened. This wasn't just a small squad. This was an execution force. "They really don't like you, he said. Althera smirked weakly. "Not even a little." She turned to face him. "No. We changed something. This isn't just about survival anymore. This is about taking back what was stolen." Ethan exhaled, running a hand through his messy hair. "I don't know about you, but I've spent most of my life just trying to make it to the next day. Big speeches, inspiring revolutions. Not really my thing." Althera studied him for a moment before offering a small, tired smile. "And yet, you were willing to fight for me when no one else would." Ethan shrugged, pretending it wasn't a big deal. "Yeah, well, someone had to." She shook her head. "No, you had to." Ethan didn't argue. Maybe she was right. Maybe fate, the universe, or just pure dumb luck had thrown them together. But he knew one thing. He wouldn't change it. A distant rumble echoed across the landscape. More ships. But these weren't Dominion. The broadcast had reached the outer colonies, and now resistance fighters, ex-soldiers, smugglers, and those who had spent their lives under Dominion rule were arriving. They weren't coming to hide. They were coming to fight. Ethan pushed himself to his feet, ignoring the pain in his ribs. "Looks like we started something big." Althera watched as the first of the ships touched down, resistance fighters pouring out, weapons in hand. "Then let's make sure we finish it." Ethan grinned. "After all this, you're still giving orders, huh?" She raised an eyebrow. "I am a princess, remember?" He laughed, shaking his head. Yeah. Let's go, Your Highness. We've got a war to win." As they stepped forward, side by side, the dawn broke over the ruins. It wasn't just another day. It was a new beginning.